To do all of that and to end up with minimal impact has an exhausting effect.
Yeah.
If the nature of the probabilities results in very consistent effects, so that superior numbers of dice or superior numbers are pretty predictable of what the dice are going to do, and if the set of actions are pretty repetitive, then you get what you call the statistical grinds down of combat, for example. What's kind of interesting is that having encountered dice systems with highly specific high bounds, and I mean like super high bounds with super high consequence, having encountered systems with those in it has made a lot of people aversive, and so they try to get to as predictable and as incremental an effect as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Once they've done that, then they discover that all of their conflicts just turn into statistical grind downs.
Yeah.
So they're stuck. They say, well, God, I don't want to just die on my... I hate saving throws. Saving throw against Dragon Breath. I hate it. It's terrible. It's no fun at all. We just roast everybody, and who cares if it was realistic or not? It sucks. No way. Our dice are going to make sense. So they go into their VR mode, and they do their little probabilistic thing, and they really lock it down, and it is given, okay, this guy's better, he's going to be better swordsman than you, and the dice are going to reflect that, goddammit. Right. And they do. Well, guess what? It takes you 80 rounds for that guy to kick your ass. Slowly, but...
4 hours to realize what was a given the rules.
Yeah. And so, do you see that these are the problems that we attempt to solve? All of these things. We don't look at these as the models for how to design. We say, how do we design to get back to the basics and say, what were these things for? Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like I would like a little more clarification between search time and handling time, because I'm not sure if there are cases where I'm mistaking which is which.
I don't think anybody's going to, take away your gold star for, falling on one side or another of the line, but I typically, it's obviously specific to a given system. The way I would pretty much say is when you implement the randomized object, that's the transition.
Gotcha.
So handling time begins in many cases by simply looking at the result of the dice.
Gotcha. And search time is figuring out everything you would need to actually...
Right. Are you ready to roll? You even hear people say that, right? It's a step.
Right.
You ready? We got our modifiers down. Everybody know that we're rolling the dice right now. And now we're going to have to process what they say.
Do you feel like search time and handling time neatly corresponds to IIE in any way?
No, not really. Because in fact, I'd say they don't. Okay. IIE has a lot to do... Where the bounce comes in with those is extremely variable.
Okay.
So I'm talking about the actual micromanagement of the randomizing objects.
Gotcha.
So that's what this topic is specifically about. Now, I can't sit here and say that only so much search time is good and anything above that is bad. Only so much handling time is good, above that is bad. I would put it this way. We're talking in terms of value added. We're talking in terms of how much fun it is to know that it came out this way. And the more fun it is, the more fun it is to process.
Yeah.
If we care about it. So then there comes an experiential thing. You can say, well, this was fun to do. We want to know what we got, and we like the fact that the dice work this way. We enjoy the fact that this modifier matters. And who knows? Maybe there is a hard limit of saying, okay, well, that's too much work for that. But as long as we start with it being fun to do this, to find this out this way, then finding the other hard limits really isn't going to be painful.
Right.
And we can just go with it. Whereas, and I think there's probably a lot of wiggle room there. But on the other hand, if we are looking at something that isn't fun, it's not well constructed in terms of where the bounce is coming in and for what and how much, then I don't care how little search and handling time you have, it's not going to be any good.
Mm.
So it is an important variable, those two things, but it's very much a micro variable in the larger picture of what are these things actually for. Ultimately, consequence of such a method is either highly significant. We're talking about tissue trauma and death.
Yeah.
Or it is consequential to the situation, but not so much to the literal state of my character continuing to play.
Right.
A good example of that distinction goes back to Champions again, which, if not the first, might have been the first game to distinguish between stun damage and body damage.
Mm.
So in my experience, and in a lot of people's experience, it was the first game in which you got knocked out by the primary mode of damage.
Right.
And not killed. And so, therefore, it was important to realize that the consequence of the damage roll was consequential for the situation, but not for your character's continued capacity to be played.
Right.
So I'm going from the most extreme down. Okay, so most extreme is I take damage, then I get tissue trauma, and, then that could kill me. And may well do so quickly or immediately. Then we take a step down and say, no, the dice are actually going to have a big deal in this conflict. They're going to have everything to do with whether this conflict goes my way or not, and perhaps a fair amount to do with the circumstances of my character. The dice are situation closing or situation affecting to a very extreme degree. But that's as far as they go. They're not going to completely... I am not going to live with heinous consequences of them going forward from there. Then you have to go a little further down that list where the dice really only wiggle your immediate situation. The immediate moment. They don't really change. They won't in and of themselves, determine the outcome. Or maybe if they do, you have to do it a whole bunch of times. And you have room to change your options and do something else and stuff like that.
Right.
But they wiggle the situation. They don't resolve it. Or if they resolve it, the chance of them doing it immediately is very low.
Can you give an example of a game that has those sort of minute situational changes consequence?
Well, one of them would be the way that people interpret a given rules set.
Okay.
If you start getting conflicts in a game where you, say, roll when there's a conflict, and you start getting conflicts that in and of themselves have very little immediate consequence.
Right. How much at stake?
There is perhaps an observation to be made of Dungeon World in this regard. The effects of rolls in Dungeon World are often very gaudy, but they are not particularly consequential. Now, maybe I'm wrong. And somebody can correct me on that one. But some of the other games that are designated powered by the apocalypse do have that feature. Can you really do much with all of these rolls?
Right.
And that kind of depends on each individual design. There is a tendency in those games for there to be a large number of moves, and the moves all have multiple options, and that all sounds very consequential. But if you go and you look inside them, it's either, like in Monster Hearts, take a string on someone, or get +1 going forward. And you're kind of like, well, yeah, but what did my roll do?
Right.
Now, if the group, as I have argued many times in Monster Hearts, if the group makes a roll count in terms of resolution, in addition to all those mechanistic changes, then you're talking about a very different experience of play. Otherwise, you have a tendency for the actual fiction of play to not really do much and run around like a hamster wheel, even though everybody's got a string here and a +1 there, kicking around all the time from their rolls. Does that make any sense?
I think so, yeah.
So, you could also point to other games in which characters have a bazillion hit points, and you can have a long combat, and the question is they can kind of see which way the wind is blowing, if it is even, by just seeing, their ups and downs and hit points this round, that round, this round, that round, and they have enough room to change up their tactics between rounds, even to switch their entire thing. Okay, we're switching to try and getting out of here.
Right.
Or we're switching to trying to do this other thing, or whatever. Switch up our formation, so that now it's going to be artillery for a while, while the cleric heals our frontline guys. You guys see the idea?
Yeah.
You can... the idea being here that the role is more of the momentary situation. Perhaps cumulatively, it can lead to an outcome. But in many cases, it might not even do that, depending on the game. So do you see how I've kind of taken it all the way from, the role really is serious business to the role is much more circumstantial. And I actually don't think that there's any bad place on that spectrum.
Right.
There may be a poorly designed use of a place on that spectrum relative to everything else in play. Right. But the cog itself does not have, a bad size.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Where are we at now? Putting together all the things that I've talked about here. You're kind of starting to see perhaps a little bit more at work. Much ink has been spilled in the distinction with what I used to call, or still do, conflict and task.
Mm-hmm.
Conflict resolution is that which, when conducted, is going to give you an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Task resolution pertains to each atomic task. And if that comes up with a resolution in a circumstance where something needs to be resolved cumulatively or not, or whatever, then so be it. But its job was to know that that task, that stated action, was done or not done.
Right.
So what I want to say, and this confuses everybody, is that I'm not talking about scale. I'm not saying that conflict resolution is about resolving the whole fight, and task resolution is about resolving every sword swing.
Right.
We do have, in fact, task resolution across the whole scale and conflict resolution across the whole scale.
Right.
So as long as you understand that difference, that gives you a little bit more vocabulary for what the dice may actually be doing per roll.